Hey,
Hello.
can you tell us more about yourself?
Yeah, I'm
Who are you?
Tapan Parikh. I'm a professor at Cornell Tech on Roosevelt Island. I grew up in New York, Brooklyn, Long Island. I lived 20 years on the West Coast, Seattle, Berkeley, other places. That's me.
Nice.
How long have you been on the island?
So how long have you been on the island?
I lived on the island for almost 2 years now.
2 years.
Yeah.
And in those 2 years, can you tell us about any experiences that you've had with racism, prejudice, or social injustice?
That happened to myself, or just that I was parties or
From your own personal
From my own
experience.
perspective, for the most part, let's see. There was one time I was on Main Street and an older woman kind of approached me and my kids. And she wanted to know where I was from. And so I told her I was from Queens, and she would not accept that as a valid answer. She was like, "Well, where are you from?" I'm like, "Okay, I was in Brooklyn and Long Island too." And she's like, "No, where are you from?" I'm like, "Okay, I lived over here for a while." And she just wanted a specific answer, and I wouldn't give her that answer. At some point, I knew the answer that she wanted, and I wouldn't give her that answer. She kept pressing, and so eventually I had to say, "Yeah, well, my family's from India," and so then that made her happy. And she actually kind of acted like I was rude, She was like, "Why are you being rude? Why you gotta be so stuck up and haughty about this?" I'm like, "I'm not stuck up, man. I'm just answering your question in the way that I know how. I'm not from India, man. I'm not from that place. My genes are from that place. My ancestors are from that place. I have a sort of cultural affinity to that place, but I've lived there 4 years out of 45, right? So, so that was the only experience I had that directly, I think. And then I see around the school sometimes, in the Bay Area where I used to live, it's not like there wasn't racism, but it wouldn't be in your face. No one would be like, you're this race, you're that race, or something like that. And my kids growing up there, they would have never commented on someone's race or ethnicity. You wouldn't do that. But here I see them doing it all the time, actually.
Interesting. Yeah. I would like to know a little bit more about that. How has your children's perspectives about race changed since moving from California to Roosevelt Island?
Yeah, in the Bay, it was just never talked about.
Okay.
Someone's race or an ethnicity, it wasn't something that was spoken about, and if it was spoken about, it was hushed tones, kind of and it wasn't something that was definitely the kids didn't talk about it in school and stuff. And so my kids had never encountered that kind of. But then they got here, and they kind of say it's not only race and ethnicity. Kids curse a lot more here. They talk about sex and drugs and all these kinds of things a lot more here. So they just talk about a lot more subjects than they did in the Bay. But race and ethnicity is definitely something they talk about, and not always in PC terms. Also, sometimes they're they'll make I've heard my kids make fun of certain ethnicities, and I'm not sure if they do it directly to those kids, but definitely amongst themselves around the house and whatnot. And that was really surprising at first for my wife and I to see that. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. So you mentioned that they never really talked about it in the Bay Area as much. Do you think that's because racism didn't matter as much? It just didn't.
No, it definitely mattered.
It mattered. It's just like you said, the nature of it was hush hush, not necessarily.
Yeah, it played out in online fora and next door and on the blogs. Just no one would say it to your face.
Gotcha.
We lived in a very white community. In the Bay Area, I had a couple of examples. So in the Bay Area, I used to live in a very white older community, and two examples in particular. So there was an African American family that lived at the top of the hill where we lived, and the father of that family was actually a very well-known principal of a school in the area around there, and the son actually was a famous football player. But anyway, I knew that because I knew it from talking to somebody else, and so one day I was just in front of my house in the Berkeley Hills, and there's a group of white people kind of walking up the block, and they're standing in front of my house, and they're pointing to my house, and they're talking about it. And so I go outside, and I'm like, "What's going on? What's going on here?" And this guy's leading. It's my neighbor, actually. He lives 2 doors down. One of the original residents of that neighborhood since when it was developed from an apple orchard in the 50s. He was leading a tour of my neighborhood. And so he stops at the next house from mine. He didn't, I walked up, and I'm like, "What's going on?" And I had clearly walked up out of my own house and joined the tour, and he had seen me. But he explained none of this, what's going on to me. I had to hang around the back of that group to just kind of piece together what's going on. So anyway, we get to like doors down from me, which is like an elderly couple who are like very famous mountaineers, really well known, who live in an architecturally famous house. And so when those people came out, like they were like welcomed and introduced, like, oh, these are these people and so on, and like, oh, it's a beautiful architectural house, such and such. Maybach was the architect, and so they they got the royal treatment, and they were like, and so that's interesting. And then we get to the top of the hill with this African American family that I mentioned, and their house is a little bit weird architecturally. It's like all white. It's got this little weird structure in there. And the guy like literally stops, and he's like, the first thing he says is like, yeah, this is an African American community. They moved to this neighborhood relatively recently. I just hate the architecture of this house. I think it's just an eyesore for our community. And just like I'm standing right there, and I'm like, that's the only thing you're gonna say about this family? The dude's like a really well-known principal. His son's an NFL football player. I mean, there's so many things you could have chosen to say about that family, and this is what you come up with to say. So I'm like, that was one of the examples. And the other example was, I was like, my neighbor across the street, she asked for help moving the garbage bins in. So I helped her move them in. And then, in interacting with her, it was clear that she had confused me with this other dude like 4 doors down, which was another African American guy who had moved in. He was like 65 years old. And so I was like, how did she confuse me with this dude? Like first of all, she lives directly across the street from me. Like, I see her all the time. And so, stuff like that, in general, like, even people we knew would be like, so we lived in the hills, and like the geography of Berkeley is like the people in the hills, generally more affluent communities, more white communities, and in the flats, there's more mixed race and other socioeconomic groups. And so, even someone we knew once was like, oh, if the shit really hits the fan, I'm worried about the people from the flats coming up into the hills and stuff. I'm like, that's what keeps you up at night, I guess, and so there's a lot of stuff like that, in the Bay Area, like where it was, spoken in those terms.
Okay.
But the kids, I felt like kids were really nice in the Bay Area, and kids were really thoughtful and sensitive to those kinds of questions to one another. So,
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. So in the process of identifying injustice, where do you find hope? Where is it? Yeah.
Can I just interject a question? I find that like one of the things I like to ask people is like, how do you make sense of that, and then like individualize it to them. So like for you, as somebody who's kind of representative of modernity in the way that you're like a professor of technology at this university, how do you make sense of people essentially questioning your citizenship because you're South Asian or because you're brown? Like, how do you make sense of that, of where we are in the world in that way? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think at this point people are questioning my citizenship. I didn't take that interaction to be like that.
But just the moment when you were like, where are you really from,
No, I hear you. I mean, I didn't take. I mean, I guess I've always been really confident, and so I didn't take it at that level. I guess. How I take it is like how I've always took it, and especially when I moved from Brooklyn to Long Island. It's like I'm not the normative person here. I'm not just gonna blend in. And for all variety of reasons, one of which I'm brown, but there's a whole bunch of things for which I'm just not gonna blend into the background. And so I think a lot of people who are not of like the majority race feel that way. That like for whatever reason I'm gonna stick out wherever I am. And you actually actively make an effort. When I was a kid, I actually actively made an effort not to stick out, and I think my kids, I see that do that sometimes too, just because it draws unwanted attention to you and engages you in conversations you might not want to have. So definitely as a kid, that was my coping strategy. Nowadays, I'm just like, whatever, man. Like, you want to have at it, let's have at it. And so. Yeah, it's not as much, but I still see it in my kids sometimes, and I'm not sure if it's just their personality or their race or their identity. They definitely want to avoid situations where they're going to stick out or be seen as the outlier.
I mean, what are some ways that they try to not stick out? Inconspicuous.
I mean, they just don't. I mean, I think I was much worse about it than my kids are, for example. Like when I was a kid, I never wanted my parents to speak to me in my native language outside the house. And my grandmother, my grandfather, and I love them dearly, and but they wore native dress, they were sorry, and and so I would be a little bit like, it would be a little awkward to have them around too, and then having people over to my house, all the spices and the gods and the idols and all this kind of stuff. That was always something that was a little awkward for me. Again, especially after I moved to Long Island, because when I was in Brooklyn, who cared? So much stuff going on that I didn't feel like that much of an outlier. But in Long Island, definitely, I felt different than everybody else. And, it was pointed out that I was different than everyone else also. And when you get into middle school and all that stuff, it kind of gets worse. With my kids, it's not as much. I mean, we speak to them in our native language all over the place, and they speak back to us. They don't seem to be put off by that. But again, I think that's because we live on Roosevelt Island. If they lived on Long Island, I'm not sure how true all that stuff would be. I think times have changed too. But it's just like, I think they're just kids. I don't think it's like they're thinking about it that hard. Maybe I'm just thinking about it that hard because I went through all those experiences growing up.
Right.
I'm not sure my kids are thinking about it that much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Are we done?
No, I would keep, remember I was telling you it's like a date, right? Like, so you keep going.
Wasn't that the whole question?
I try to like pull something from what they said and be like, when you're thinking about the ways in which, for example, I'm just making this up. When you're thinking about the ways in which there are similarities around racial discrimination for your kids compared to when you were growing up, or the ways that it's different, do you feel hopeful about the trajectory Roosevelt Island is on? Do you feel like we're coming to a more inclusive place? What makes you feel hopeful that you see happening here now? I'm just like throwing out some questions, but like, based on what you said, I would try to move to the hope thing.
Okay.
You're doing great though.
Okay.
Yeah, you're doing really good, really good. By the way, this is like a core research skill.
Gotcha.
Interviewing, we just spent all morning interviewing, and it's actually one of the most important arts of doing human-computer interaction or qualitative research in general. The art of interviewing. Absolutely crucial, and so I think this is a really good experience for you to get in general. But like she said, it's like a conversation. So if you're curious, in terms of what it's called, is like a semi-structured interview protocol. And so you've got this basic set of things you want to touch on. But if you get curious about something, or if you find something you want to elaborate on, or you just want to know more on, you just riff on those topics.
There's definitely something that I'm interested in. So when it comes to how you perceive people's reaction to different religions that aren't a part of, I guess, the standard Abrahamic religions. What maybe Islam or Hinduism or Buddhism, have you seen any, I guess, tension against people who practice these faiths? Or
in society you can see it all over the place now. Personally, when I was a kid, it was more in jest, because idols, we have a lot of idols in Hinduism, so my friends would be like, what are all those idols, and, they used to call them satin monkeys, actually. So, it's kind of rude at the end of the day. But, it is, that was a little bit odd, and I think my kids are actually, they are, we're not a very religious family, but we have, we are respectful, I think, of religious practice. So my kids I've definitely seen my kids being much less resistant than I was. My parents are very religious. My family actually is pretty religious. We have we have a temple in our house and this and that, and my kids participate. So they've been good about it.
Resistant to what? I guess
resistant to how it could be perceived, how just again like what I said earlier about standing out,
Gotcha.
Doing things that other people may not understand the reason or implications
Gotcha.
of. And
So what about here on Roosevelt Island? Is there a Hindu community? Or?
There's a small Hindu community, yeah. I mean, my wife and I have both, for better or for worse, we usually choose not to associate only with people of our own race or ethnicity, and that's true for both my wife and I. We've never done that. So whenever we live here, we don't only associate with those people. When we lived in Berkeley, we didn't only associate with those people.
Gotcha.
In Seattle, there weren't many of those people. So, but we never have done that, And so even here, and I think that ends up that we have less friends somehow. All of our everyone, my family, all our extended networks, they all have almost exclusively Indian social networks of friends. That's their community, But my wife and I have never chosen to do that. And I think as a result, we have a smaller social network typically because most people, I think, tend to do associate in group, But we do things with them. For example, we had the international dinner day at the middle school. At the elementary school here. And, my wife had a table with the Indian ladies, and so. I think it's a double-edged sword. I think at a certain level, I'd love to interact with more people like of our own kind of ethnicity and culture, because then we have some things in common, and like food-wise, tradition-wise, culture-wise, and I could reinforce some of those traditions in our family and with our kids. But on the other hand, I also want to like just embrace people who I like, and I just want to more kids than myself to embrace diversity too. I don't know. I always wonder about. I feel like at some level, I feel like when I look the Muslim community in the island, because I don't know how to say it, but they all play soccer too, just like my kids play soccer, and but I don't see that group of soccer playing kids hanging out with the group of soccer playing kids my kids play with, and I just wonder why. I don't know what sometimes they play together, but it's not. I just don't feel like they're always included in the same way. And part of it is, I think, because my kid plays on a soccer club that's expensive, and I don't know if all those kids don't want to play on a club that's so expensive. Maybe that's not something that they're used to doing culturally. Even I'm not used to it. Why would you pay so much for soccer? But we do, because everyone else does. So that's one thing I wonder about. Is like, is everybody included in all of like the kind of activities on the island that we participate in? And I wonder why they're not as represented as they could be, the kinds of things that we participate in.
That's really interesting. Do you think that for some groups of people it's harder to access certain activities here on the island, certain resources, or certain communities access to certain information?
I'm sure that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure that's true, and it has to do probably with all kinds of like just awareness, language, social networks, cost, so many reasons why things could probably end up being fragmented.
Right.
Yeah.
And you did say something that went against my expectations previously. You said that because you, and correct me if I'm wrong, you said because you like to associate with different groups of people, you have a rather diverse network, your social network is smaller? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Okay. I kind of
Maybe we're just not good at making friends. That's probably what it is. My wife and I are we're both pretty, like shy and not as outgoing as we could be. So probably not so much. Right?
Because I would expect if you.
That's a fair point. Yeah.
If you jump around communities and you like to experience and be exposed to different cultures and peoples, then that would usually equal a larger network.
No, that's a good point. I think we're probably just because we're shy.
Yeah.
We're busy. We're not good at organizing
Gotcha.
activities. It's like we're having a barbecue. We need to invite people that we know, stuff like that.
Definitely.
So just we're not good at it probably.
Interesting. Okay.
And I'm lazy.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Although I was going to say about the having the smaller social group when you consciously make more diverse connections is that I think a lot of conversations about inclusion happen implicitly. So I think that sometimes I experience this because we interact with lots of different people, and usually like the people we hang out with are self-selected. So like I always am friends with the lesbian parents. I'm always friends with the gay parents. Like I'm always friends with the one single parent. Like I think I don't know if it's even like conscious hatred, but I think it's people are afraid of the unknown, and when you don't, like you said, the majority of your family they have like predominantly South Asian. People stay in when they see somebody who's like an outlier. They're like, I don't know, it's an unknown quantity, and I think they kind of like waver. They want to know what they signed up for.
Yeah.
But my question was, I think right now the questions around immigration policy are really highly magnified, and kind of what for you as somebody who values diversity and who values inclusion, right, and who has like essentially lived in this country for a very long time, like what is your response, or how do you navigate even professionally the concept of human-computer interaction that this kind of the changes the focus now in the immigration policy, like that, for example, from India, that they prioritize people who are PhD students, for example, and in the media. This is not even necessarily representative of who actually tries to come here, but they'll pit like a PhD like art science student from India against like MS-13 animals coming from El Salvador, right? And like both of those are kind of caricatures. But even for the PhD student coming from India, I think it was a couple months ago, they were trying to change it that you can no longer bring like an immediate relative besides a spouse or a child, like to bring a brother or these pathways for immigration that were previously like easily accessible. And I know that there is a strain of like anti-blackness within the South Asian community, as far as like, we've made it, we're different, we're the good brown people, we're not like those, right? And so for you, professionally, in terms of like what you're developing, or just like living here on the island, like kind of what's your response to that, or how do you navigate that?
I mean, I guess I'll talk about it at two levels. I mean, I think just at the personal level, my wife and I have essentially lost 3 sets of really close couple of friends of ours because of immigration issues that they face. People who went to graduate school here, were very successful here, wanted to settle down and make a life for themselves here, but didn't get permanent citizenship, either an H-1 visa or a green card, and so they had to move back to India. And those are like really, very close friends of mine, all 3 of those sets, and that was really hard for us to watch. Like, people who would have really made a contribution here, and I mean, is that even the way to characterize whether or not someone should stay here or not? I don't know, but it seems to be the dominant way of thinking about it, at least policy-wise. But even according to those criteria, I think these are people who have made a real contribution here. But the contribution they would have made is like social and cultural and not technical, necessarily technical. So now in me transitioning to like professionally and systematically, I think that's really a shame. Is because now when we think about people who are coming here, we only think about 2 kinds of things, capital and technology. Like if you can contribute one of those 2 things, well, fine, you've got a pathway to residency in this country. If it's not one of those 2 things, fine, we don't need it. And I think that's like such a short-sighted way of thinking about human capital, like when I think about what this country really needs, I think this country really needs some culture at the end of the day, like I think that's really what we're lacking, we don't know how to have fun together, we don't know how to enjoy ourselves, we don't know how to create things of lasting value, we don't know how to, like appreciate beauty and aesthetics, and like that's what I feel is really lacking in this society, like, all right, we've got all of this fancy, shiny stuff, but what for, what are we going to use it for? You want to have a sense of beauty and poetry and aesthetics too, and none of that exists that I can see in any broad way. No, I shouldn't be so pessimistic. There's beautiful music, and there's beautiful art, and there's beautiful lots of things, but we need more of it. That's definitely the thing we need more of. And then when I look at like immigration policy, like for example, really related to human-computer interaction, and in the social sciences, for students to come for, really practically speaking here, that's a real barrier to growing those kinds of degree programs here, because those kinds of degree programs, first of all, a lot of our students are foreign. Second of all, if we had lots of foreign students coming to those programs, companies are less likely to spend H-1B visas on them because they can find Americans to do those kinds of jobs, right? So like that's really the kinds of calculation that happens here. We're only interested in these certain kinds of foreigners to come, at least from this work-oriented pathway that fulfill very specific technical requirements. But like what does that say about our diversity broadly speaking? Our epistemic diversity, if you will. Our diversity in ways of thought and value systems and models of aesthetics. That if we don't make those kinds of things more diverse and more robust, this technology is going to continue to be like really dry and
catering to the status quo, pretty much.
Catering to status quo and dry and not fun, at the end of the day.
So for those who would listen to you say all of this about the importance of diversity, and like, but they still don't see the value in it. I mean, is there any way that one could, I guess, better convey it? Like, I mean, because I come across this often where people are just like, well, so what? Well, what? So what? Like, and I mean, I don't particularly argue with them, but it's just like, I don't, it's like, what's the best way to manifest the clear benefits of it? Like, I mean, because I feel like certain people have certain agendas, and oftentimes I guess their power is attached to certain hierarchies and certain structures and systems.
I think you nailed it on the
and
head.
and so I mean I get that. I get why certain people wouldn't want a more diverse or inclusive environment because of their power and statuses attached to certain hierarchies that pretty much marginalize and oppress people.
I think you nailed it on the head.
But you know, it's just.
I think that's brilliant.
But at the same time, it's like a part of me still wants to kind of just like set something in front of them and say like, well, look, like, okay, you think you have power now, but if you like, I guess, expanded your consciousness in a way and weren't so afraid to kind of let loose of this little bit of power you have, like there's so much more that, you know, can come out of it. Like there's like more fulfillment that you can get from it rather than being like, oh, I'm better than you, like I'm sitting on top of this hierarchy. And I don't know, like, and I personally spend a lot of time thinking about that, and just the ways that we can present the solid value of diversity and just inclusiveness.
And I think you nailed it on the head. I think you really did. You know, I think people are, for the most part, people in these kinds of systems and structures that are creating these kinds of incentives are motivated more by fear than they are by like love and happiness and enjoyment. You know, they're afraid, and at the end of the day, they're probably afraid of some people coming and taking their shit. You know, like that's really what.
That's often stolen.
Yeah, people. You know, that's what people are really afraid of. You know, like. So I see, for example, in the hiring here, faculty hiring. You know, like, oh, if we don't hire the very best person, people think we're not going to be as good as MIT. You know, can we really take a risk in hiring? You know, then we'll be seen as a second-rate university. And often this comes down to like questions to me of like, again, of epistemic diversity. You know, like, you know, what do you value as knowledge and knowledge contributions? What kind of academy do you really want to create? I mean, that's just how it reflects in my professional world. But I see these same kind of things you're talking about. You know, people are very resistant to people that don't look and act and think. Especially not in academia. It's really about, you know, look and act is one part of it, but people who don't think like them is especially threatening. Because, you know, like, because if your whole system is about a certain way of thinking and your expertise is all grounded in a certain way of thinking and your superiority is always grounded in that way of thinking, if you come across someone who thinks differently, it's really threatening to all of those structures. And not only are you afraid for like what the implications for you are, you're afraid of like the implications in terms of how you're perceived.
Interesting.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't know what to do. I mean, I wish I had an answer to what to do about it. I really wish I did. I really wish. I think the world could be. I mean, you said it to me earlier, and it really hit home, and it's like it really is consistent with how I think about it too. It could all just be a lot more fun, you know. It could just all be a lot more fun if we just chilled a little bit, took it a little bit easy, didn't sweat it all so much.
I agree,
You know, weren't so afraid about losing stuff.
Yeah.
We're just cool with it. Yeah. It would be more fun. You know, we wouldn't be all stressed all the time. We wouldn't be all pressed all the time. And we still have almost all the same stuff. You know, at the end of the day, have fun with it. So yeah, I think.
Nice. Great. Is there anything else you'd like to?
I mean, yeah. I mean, I would like to answer this hope question. You know, like I don't know. I really like Rosemont. I want to just make sure I put that out for record. You know, like something about it I just like. You know, I like the strangeness of it. I like the connectivity of it. I like the scale of it, and I especially like the scale of it. You know, like. For me, I have a really hard time getting my head around really large social and physical systems. And here, the scale of the social and physical systems are at a scale where I feel like I can really relate to it at an experiential level, which really makes it much more, I feel like, much more scalable for me to actually like interact and engage with than like thinking about things at the scale of a city or a nation or a world. You know, those scales I just get lost in levels of abstraction. So I really like the realness of this place, and just in terms of you can actually know people, you can interact with them, you can see them around, and you're forced to be accountable to them at that level. So that's where I locate hope. You know, I locate hope in the fact that this is a small place. You know, and if it's a small place, at some level, you got to figure it out. You know, and so That's where I locate hope.
Nice. So I guess on accountability?
What?
I guess on accountability, like...
And accountability and also connectivity, you know?
Yeah,
like I just see people around, I talk to them, and I'm involved in various conversations with people all over the place, especially me who's like a shy and lazy person, doesn't get out much. Here I'm kind of forced to interact with people. And also the Cornell Tech's relationship to the island, you know? I feel like I got here and it's just been a real focus of people here, like what's going to happen with this place, what's going to be its relationship to the island, what changes it's going to create on the island. And I feel like the fact that people were asking those questions put at least me in a position where I felt like I had to generate some answers to those questions, you know, and the fact that no one else was really thinking about those questions here, aside from one or two people, you know, Jane Swanson was definitely thinking about it, Diane Levitt was definitely thinking about it, but aside from a few people, you know, and I don't think many faculty were thinking about it, like being put in a position where like especially since I'm the only one that actually lives here until Wendy, you know, I felt like I was in a position where I had to generate answers for those questions. So I've been trying the best as I can to like think about those questions in particular, like what's going to be the relationship between Cornell Tech and the community, how can that be made equitable and sustainable and bi-directional, and you know, how can, you know, even though like Cornell Tech it was and is seen as a source of disruption on the island, how can that disruptive potential be used for as much positive as possible, and how can it be essentially serve as a you know, kind of unifying and galvanizing kind of institution. Yeah.
Wow. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I would like to hear just your, like, I don't know if you have like an elevator pitch, but like what do you see as the role of tech in like kind of fostering this kind of inclusive scale?
So what do I think about the role of tech? So I think tech can't do shit really. Tech on its own can't do much. But what I do think technology can do, I think technology has such a like kind of aspirational kind of fetish aspect to it, you know, like tech gets people excited at the end of the day. That's what I think really technology can do. When you talk about new technology, when you talk about new technological possibilities, people get excited. And when people get excited, lots of things are possible. Like they get motivated to talk and interact and build new systems and structures and infrastructures. So at really the end of the day, I think that's where I think technology, for me at least, having worked in like technology for various kinds of positive efforts all over the world, I think what tech really enabled is the ability to create new kind of conversations, new kinds of connections, new kinds of partnerships, relationships, collaborations, but not through the tech, but because of the tech. Because the tech was seen as such an aspirational and exciting thing to be involved with. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I think that's a critical part because even though I am critical of the creation of the way in which Cornell Technia has been integrated into the community, a lot of times it's flattened out too much. Cornell Technia equals gentrification equals people leaving, or like tech is evil, I won't have Facebook. And I think that it's just much more nuanced and complex than that. Or you have the people who are like, tech will save us. You know, just give the school 1,000 computers. Buy 3D printers. We have money. Let's buy 3D printers, right? And like for me, 3D printers are like interesting because I always love the makers movement, and it's like about all fostering like all these different people coming together. And there's like so many institutions where that's what they got. They got the 3D printer, like, and none of the other stuff that goes along with it.
No, I think that's where again that's because people think through the tech and not thinking about how does the tech galvanize people to have more ambition and hope and energy to do things, you know, and the people part of it gets left out, doesn't get invested in, doesn't get supported, doesn't get institutionalized. So I think that then that's where you end up with a 3D printer in the corner of some, you know, high school somewhere that no one's using because no one invested in the people to actually use it or to care about it or to work together because of it. So yeah, that's a common. And I think that's like that's because again I think that's because people don't understand like the theory of change with regards to technology. I think people think the technology itself is the reason, like this causes the change. The technology doesn't cause the change. The technology can, I think, if deployed correctly, can create the context for people to really get excited about change.
Anything else? No.
You gonna do her next?
Yes. All right. Great. Thank you.